Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Conscious Style Podcast video version. Today I'm chatting with Natasha Halesworth of the Consistency Project, a shop that curates secondhand and reworked clothing. But the Consistency Project is more than just a shop. They are dedicated to breaking the stigma of secondhand and driving conversations around its unique value and impact within the fashion industry. Natasha, thank you
Yes,
so much for coming onto the show. I'm excited to have you on. Could you start us off with a bit of background on yourself and why you decided to start the Consistency Project?
absolutely. Hi, I'm Natasha. I am a bit about myself. Wow, a lot of things define who I am, but I basically was born and raised in Hawaii and had, grown up there for a while. I'd lived in California for a bit and then moved to New York. And really along that journey, I had done a bunch of different jobs and explored different careers. And I'd always been interested in fashion. And so over that time frame, I decided to kind of start a little side project, now the Consistency Project, to really kind of explore my interest in fashion. And I think it's evolved over time. So what it was when I started, it is definitely not what it is today. And I definitely see, in like, I don't know, 10 years, if I still get to be doing this wonderful thing, I feel like it could be different then. But yeah, so I'll dive into the Consistency Project as we probably get into the interview a
Yeah,
little more, I'm sure.
yeah, for sure. For sure. We'll be talking about a lot of various elements of it and how your
Absolutely.
business is, yeah, focused on reuse and secondhand in various ways. So
Yeah.
maybe, yeah, maybe it would be helpful for us to start with the basics and
Yeah.
talk
Yeah.
about maybe the difference between secondhand and vintage versus your reworked and upcycled clothing. So can you break down the difference between that for listeners?
Yeah. Um, yeah. And so this was definitely something that I, in the beginning of my journey of starting the Consistency Project, didn't really understand myself and was exploring. And so really to break it down, I think secondhand really, and the reason why we try to use the term secondhand more so over vintage is because it encompasses a lot more. So vintage really is defined as, you know, um, at least 20 years or older. And so really kind of that gives a date. But I think nowadays we've loosely used the term vintage a lot more.
Yeah.
And really it has almost like taken over the term secondhand a bit, which I think, can be beneficial in the sense that vintage has become more mainstream. But I think, truly secondhand encompasses everything, whether modern, it was just used, yesterday and given to a friend. The next day, it's really something that you're able to reuse and give another life, essentially. Within the rework and kind of upcycle space, I think rework and upcycle are both basically the same thing. I think upcycle has traditionally had a little bit more of not a stigma around it, but a little bit more of like, oh, if you're upcycling, it seems more of like a little like a project that might be just at home and may not be something that you are necessarily doing full time. It doesn't give kind of this air of like um, maybe around like business, I guess you would
Hmm.
say, right? Like, so like, I think obviously there's businesses that upcycle, but I think the term rework was kind of instead adopted by us to give the air of like, we are literally taking something and like reworking it. Just like upcycle, you're taking something and you're upcycling it. So it's like re and cycle. It's like maybe if you combine it's like recycle, it's basically the same thing. But I think, I don't think there's much of a difference. And truly, we are also an upcycle brand if people identify with that term more. We just personally identified with the rework aspect because we're really in the business of taking existing garments versus only like dead stock fabrics
Mm-hmm.
and reworking it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'd love to talk more about that as well, like the difference
Yeah,
between using dead stock versus using existing garments. So,
absolutely.
yeah, could you walk us through your sourcing process, like how
Yeah.
you source the materials for your reworked clothing?
I know. I think like I want to ask you a question on this. I thought it would be interesting.
Yeah.
Like I think like this idea of sourcing has this like almost this air of like a hidden secret, or I don't know, it seems
Yeah.
like weird. Like from your perspective, what is it that gives off that like why do you think that is? I'm curious. Because
Yeah.
maybe I can address it in my answer.
Right. I feel like I envision it being like a warehouse, like some sort of maybe something that's only available B2B, like you have to be an insider to
Mm-hmm,
know
mm-hmm,
about where these, because they're not maybe, I don't envision them being just like shops that you can go to
mm-hmm,
downtown,
mm-hmm,
like, or
mm-hmm,
whatever. I envision them
mm-hmm.
more these warehouse that you have to know where they are to get, to get access to them.
Totally. So yeah, I think so. Sourcing, I think it's such a complex thing to talk about because it really depends on the phases of your business. So I can talk about like phase one of the consistency project, which essentially was just, I was just sourcing vintage from thrift stores and reselling it, right? And so I think I know a ton of different shops to this day that have brick and mortars, but also, online shops on Etsy. And really the sourcing process is exactly what someone might think and is so obvious, but it's like going to a thrift store. I think that is
Right.
a main I think that is a main source, but for some reason I think from the consumer side, you kind of doubt that that's the source, but really it is a huge, huge source for many, especially starting out because the next phase is really the phase that or the source that you were talking about, which is like warehouses or things that are a little bit more inaccessible, I guess, to just someone walking up the street and wanting to buy for
Mhm.
themselves for personal buy. And the reason why warehouses are a little bit more B2B is because you're dealing with minimums and you're dealing with more of a process that essentially needs to be in scale or in bulk.
Mhm.
And so when we think about, our personal closets, I mean, we really shouldn't be buying things in that scale or that bulk to
Yeah.
begin with. So it really doesn't make sense for someone that is interested in secondhand or thrifting to want to go to a warehouse like that because it's the requirements are just it just wouldn't make sense. And from a business perspective, from the warehouses that do exist, I mean, a lot of them are rag houses. A lot of them are sifting through thousands of pounds of clothing, and really, their time to like have someone come in, help them walk through, like it needs to kind of weigh out.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's a volume based thing where they're like, okay, well, if we're going to take the time to host you in our warehouse, which is most times chaotic, most times like it needs like a lot like direction, like where's this at, like you're going through a lot of things, it can be a liability safety wise, it's not really built to just have someone that isn't familiar kind of with the
Mhm.
business kind of just diving in.
Right.
And so I think that's where it just depends on the phase. And so for us, we've obviously kind of gone through different phases, and as we've really figured out what was our niche and what we really wanted to focus on, we realized that we needed to get things more in a bulk. If we're reworking one thing, we want to kind of be able to provide multiple different options of that. And so a warehouse made sense because we could buy in bulk for a particular type of pant, like our Stan Ray pant. And so I think sourcing can be also built on relationships. I mean, I know a lot of, people and shops have built relationships with different, like they call them pickers or people that kind of thrift and go to flea markets on a regular that like just enjoy that experience to then sell it to sellers that have shops. And so all of that is not just like on the internet that you can just like Google, how do I find, this person that's
Yeah.
interested. I mean, maybe there needs to be a platform built to connect these people, which would be super cool. And great for, shops that are starting out. But essentially, it's all about the relationships. It's all about having the conversations and really getting to know different people who could potentially be sources. And I think that's what really makes a great shop sometimes is, the owner or the curators, they have built great relationships, therefore can have the best access to certain product. And I think, anyone that is really interested in this business has the ability to really build the relationships. I don't think there's any type of, there are challenges obviously, but I think, if you go with in the mindset of like trying to be authentic and really sharing and building a partnership, almost like a mutual partnership, I think that's where sourcing and that whole world can be something that you can really be successful in.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you go to these warehouses or thrift shops, what's your criteria or checklist when deciding what you want to buy or what's kind of a no? Because you're reworking it, but I imagine
Yeah.
there's some things that aren't maybe as fixable as others.
Yeah. So, I mean, back in the day, like when I started, it was really like an exploration where I kind of just went with my gut of like, oh, let me just try this out, right? Because I think it's also a learning process, and almost having too much of a criteria, especially with rework, can hold you back from the creative
That makes
process, right?
sense.
So there's a lot of experimentation, I think, that goes on in the very beginning. And really, when I was just sourcing as a vintage shop, I was seeing different things that I saw as opportunities to rework, which then led to kind of what the Consistency Project is today, right? And so it was that openness of like, okay, like trying something different, figuring out, what really spoke to the community we've built, but also to what I knew was possible from a more I guess, fashion construction standpoint, right? So, like, having some background and understanding of garment construction definitely also helps you see something in a light that can be taken apart and then reconfigured just by looking at it.
Yeah.
And so, I think, overarching though, we've always been a brand that focuses on functionality, comfort, and just, something that is still fun at the same time. And I think that has always been my filter of like, okay, I'm looking at it. It's like, what can I wear this every day, but still feel like, it's something special, right? It's like kind of finding that like middle ground where it really can like toy between going out with friends and just working around the house.
Yeah.
It's like how can I have something that can work for both settings? And I think that mindset just comes from a very personal interest
Yeah.
of mine, style wise, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense to have kind of a style or utilitarian aspect in mind of what works in certain situations to kind of
Yeah.
help determine that. So, we touched on this a little bit before, but I'd love to talk more about dead stock versus like,
Yeah.
you sourcing garments that you rework. So,
Yeah.
on the consumer or individual person side outside of the industry, it can be a little confusing. So, can
Yes.
you explain what dead stock is and sort of how that system works in the fashion industry?
Yeah. It it's still sometimes confusing to me, to be honest, because we're using kind of a blanket term to really cover a range of different categories
Mm,
within kind of clothing or like within the fashion industry, right? So dead stock, it basically means what it says. It's like dead stock. So it's stock that essentially couldn't be sellable, or a shop closed down. So therefore, they have no platform to be selling it. So it's stock that needs to go, it's essentially dead to the business. And then there's dead stock that's also more so potentially like one-off imperfection production runs, right? So maybe they did a design of pants, and there's one detail that was actually wrong from the actual design that they want to do. But now you have this batch of like 50 pants that you had made that's not the one that you want to release to your customer. Mm-hmm. So what do we do with that as well? And then you have just excess production from a more fabric standpoint. So from the beginning of the fashion journey, we also have stock that is just produced in excess to essentially cover, potential designs that may not have gone through, or maybe that they had like over, shot and like planning, I guess you would say. So you're like, oh, okay, I need, 100 yards of this fabric. And then really like when it went to production, you only used 50. So then you have these 50 yards that you're like, okay, well, we're not running this style anymore. We don't want to produce more clothing that potentially won't be sold. So therefore, it stays as fabric. And so I think to someone that's like, I don't know what this is, just really see it as things that exist already, but that is potentially still new to the consumer. So it's not new within the business production flow, right? Because from business to business, I'm getting dead stock fabric. It's not really new to me. So it's technically secondhand from another business, but when I produce from it, it's still new to the customer because I'm producing something new. And the same with like a shop that closes and they have, tons of stock of inventory, and at that point, it hasn't really seen the customer, but if I'm buying it from another business, it's technically secondhand to me because I'm taking something that is no longer useful to another business and then somehow giving it a second life in another aspect. So I think that's the way to see it. And I think dead stock can be really... it can be a term that could be, I guess, used in other industries as well. It's just traditionally has been within the fashion industry primarily.
Yeah, and I think part of the confusion is, it is pre-consumer stage, so kind of hidden a little bit.
Yes. Yes, exactly. And I think that there's just so many I guess, subcategories that can fit into this major category. And so when you think about all the different types, you're like, I don't know what's happening. Yeah. But I think it's part of a business or brand's job to gently communicate these things as they're going through the process. So really sharing things in the moment, in the particular example or experience that the brand or business is going through, which then gives the consumer, the community, much more confidence in understanding what's happening and using real life examples to connect the two. And I think that's sometimes the part that's actually missing, because we see a lot of businesses. The reason why I think there is confusion is because we see on a website or a brand that produces new clothing advertises their stuff and says, oh, dead stock sustainable materials. And then you're just like, and then that's it. There's like no talk about, well, like, what does that even mean? Like, did you get this fabric from like another designer, or was this like what? Right. Like, there's like no communication, no narrative, and that's really, I think, a huge issue. That even if a brand is using dead stock, it's like, well, what kind of dead stock? Like, what are you actually doing that is sustainable? Like, I guess that's the part that as a brand for us, we say, oh, more than just the shop, is because we care about communicating these things and we care about showing the inside, because I think as consumers make decisions of who they support, it's important for them to know. And it's important for them to know a standard that other brands should be like doing as a bare
Mm-hmm.
minimum. You know, I think that's where like what we're doing is just bare minimum, you know, like we're trying to excel, but we think this is like the bare minimum that all brands should be doing. And from there, I think that's where we can really kind of collectively make more change
Yeah,
together.
absolutely. Just sharing more, being transparent, and that gives the consumer, yeah, as you said, more confidence and clarity on all of that. There are, because there are definitely
Absolutely.
some complexities with dead stock.
Yes.
And one of
Yes.
the complexities that I wanted to talk about was the
Yeah.
criticism that I've seen a few times in sort of the
Yeah.
sustainable fashion space, that
Yeah.
relying on dead stock make is basically giving these brands who are overproducing
Yeah.
and almost an excuse to do it, because they're like, oh, well, somebody will buy it, or they can still recover some of that money that was lost. And so maybe they
Absolutely.
are being encouraged to continue overproducing. So what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely.
Obviously, it's maybe, yeah, it's not clear, yes or no, but I would like to.
I mean, I no, yeah, totally.
Oh, I
Sorry.
was just going to say, yeah, I would just like to get your perspective on it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with the fact that we cannot feed into, or we cannot, brands that utilize dead stock or focus on rework or do anything related to reuse shouldn't be the scapegoat for the bigger brands that are overproducing. That's like, I I hands down agree with that. I think where it gets complex is really like dead stock isn't, I don't think, a solution to how the fashion industry operates, because again, that solution requires the overproduction. But at the same time, we're only thinking about dead stock as excess, and we're not thinking about dead stock that is, or sorry, I guess excess in a way that is um, in huge volumes, right? So there is such thing as excess that is almost required anytime you're producing anything. So for example, if a brand is creating a new collection, they have to plan to have a little bit extra, because if they don't and they run out of fabric during the production process, it it can cause even more waste in them having to order a whole new batch to be made, because there's minimums when you
Mm-hmm.
make things or make fabrics or anything custom, right? So there's always going to be a little bit of excess that we'll always have to work with. If we don't want excess, we shouldn't be making any new clothing
Mm-hmm.
at all. And we should just be buying secondhand and only using things that exist. That is how, right, we can approach it. But, I don't think new brands are going to just go away, right? Producing new things is going to have to be a thing, because for vintage or secondhand to even exist, it needs to be bought new at some point, right? So all the things that we buy new now, I mean, potentially could be like coveted vintage 20 years later. And so it is complex, because there is like this idea that to have secondhand,
Mm-hmm.
you need new. And there's that synergy and that balance. And I think that's something that we try to understand is balance. And there is kind of an ebb and flow. Without that balance, I think that's when things kind of go off. And so we can't expect everyone to only shop secondhand. As much as that's what we really, I mean, honestly, we probably get to a point where we could all be doing that, but it's probably not necessarily like going to be the best solution for everyone. Everyone has a different lifestyle, and we can't expect that from everyone. At the same time, I think, you know, dead stock particularly, I don't think it actually has as much negative connotation once people understand that there are other types of dead stock that aren't really related to the high overproduction that we hear about in these like fashion horror stories, because most times those garments or fabrics are actually proprietary and destroyed by these brands. That
Mm-hmm.
is a huge problem. Like we like other brands don't even get to reuse it because they're like, well, I don't want this, particular print being made by anyone else. Therefore, we're going to destroy it in, unsustainable ways, and no one will even know it ever exists. That is what's happening with a lot of technically
Yeah.
dead stock. And so really that's the conversation we should be having of overproduction. It's like, well, what's happening to the things that don't get to be reused? Like what's behind closed doors when it comes to overproduction? And a lot of the overproduction is the garment itself. And we hear about things getting destroyed and, thrown away, going to landfill. And I think that's something that we need to shed more light on, that over
Yeah.
us, or other brands trying to reuse things that already exist.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Let's focus on the big problem, which is, right, these brands who are maybe incinerating the material
Yeah,
just because they don't want someone using
yeah,
their branded, print or whatever.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's and so this is why it's very complex. I think everyone can have a perspective and an opinion, and I think all are valid. I think everyone's perspective is extremely valuable to how we kind of move forward, but it's also important to understand, listen, and kind of digest
Mm-hmm.
all perspectives. And so I feel like personally, it's like something I'm continually being open to, even learning, even being within the business. It's like just things are changing a lot within the fashion industry, and even within reuse and upcycling and secondhand and vintage. This industry is evolving so much. Every year it's
Yeah.
evolving, and so it's a constant, and how it evolves affects the kind of operational standpoint of how businesses run. So I think it's yeah, it's a conversation that will be lasting for a very
Right,
long
right. And
time.
it's important to always have these conversations and talk about how we can improve these things and maximize the use of
Yeah,
things while also
yeah,
minimizing overproduction. Yeah, as you were talking about before, it's finding this synergy, finding this balance. So I think it's about having that continual discussion for sure.
absolutely,
And
absolutely.
then sort of slightly shifting gears to another aspect of your business, which is the reworking. I would
Hmm,
love
hmm.
to talk about that design process because I imagine
Yeah.
it's vastly different than sort of the conventional or standard
Hmm.
design process today. So, could you share what that's
Yeah.
like?
Yeah. I mean, the basis of it is taking something that already exists and kind of reworking it into something a little bit different. And so the design process is really materials driven, garment driven. And so it's driven by the need for something to potentially be reworked due to damage, due to maybe style and fit. Like our bodies have evolved over time, and so certain things sometimes the traditional body type and sizing back 20 years ago is completely different to how it is today. So how do we accommodate and change something to fit and be more in size inclusive today? And I think that's also part of the process to think about. It we I'll use our Stanray like kind of pants as an example. Those were our dead stock that we use, and it's not the dead stock where it's like excess stock. It's dead stock that is categorized is within that category because it's mainly due to imperfections, potential design changes, just like small. And when I say imperfections, it's like extremely minor. Stitching could be quite off, or it could be that it was sitting in the warehouse for so long, and over time it started to get like water damage, or like age spots, or
Mm,
like there's something that makes it unsellable as new. And so we have taken that stock and found ways to, one, sell it as is, especially if we feel like it meets a quality standard for what people people really want and need. And then two, doing things like over dyeing it to cover up stains. And then for other ones, really taking it to we've done an elastic way, so changing it for sizing, making it more comfortable. And then the other part of rework is just a creative expression. Like, it's not purely focused on solving a problem. It's purely focused on the joy of taking something and making it look like, or making it have this completely new life visually and creatively. And so really what drives that process is just more so our creative, drive to kind of create something new and fun that like kind of inspires people when they wear it.
That's a great word, like inspire. I feel that way looking at your reworked pieces, and in general looking at reworked fashion. It's inspirational to see how people create what would have been waste into something so beautiful and unique. I think it definitely can encourage people or inspire people. So the reworking process is obviously very unique by nature, and I imagine not very easy to scale or let alone be mass produced. So what does that mean for you and the operations at the Consistency Project? Do you think that reworking could ever become scalable, or, would that sacrifice the nature of it, the one of a kindness and the sustainability of it? What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I think we have to get rid of the traditional sense of like scaling a business. And scaling a business typically means making more money, right? Or like, just like selling more stuff. And with the process of rework and making things one of a kind, it is almost not impossible, but it is very difficult to sell more things when it's being made one off, especially when your process is, paying everyone fairly along the way, right? Like there's like, and the costs might be really high because of that. And so therefore it's not accessible to everyone. Therefore you're not maybe selling as many as of a pant as maybe a fast fashion brand that's at a more accessible price point. And so I think for us, I think taking it slow and really trying to reframe what's scalable, like how we scale and what scaling for us means and what growing for us means, I think is what we're trying to do in the moment. I try to see other brands that are doing the same things as an example. And so, there's the one brand, Bodhi, or like Emily Bodhi. I don't know if I'm pronouncing her last name right, or a brand right, but essentially, she started with reworking one of a kind garments, but has now transitioned to replicating and using antique and like textile inspiration to produce new textiles. And so when you see that, you're like, oh, well, does that mean that that's the only way to scale? Because that's how she's scaling the business. And that's traditionally how maybe one would scale. They'd take vintage inspiration and cuts and silhouettes and just replicate it in new fabric. I mean, I've even seen tons of vintage shops do that. So there are a lot of vintage shops that have transitioned into more of their own line. What they do is they take vintage or kind of secondhand silhouettes, patterns, designs, and they replicate it in new fabric. So it's kind of almost like it looks like vintage, but it's not. And that's traditionally what I've seen happen in the past couple of years for those shops that are trying to scale and to sell more. It seems like the only pathway. But I don't think that's really, solving the bigger issue. If you are focused on producing more, we're just producing more stuff when a lot of stuff already exists. And so I really don't have the answer or know what it looks like to scale a business of our within our industry of rework and reuse. However, I do think it's important to note that sometimes there's there's only so much space within an industry sometimes, right? And so you as a brand take up so much space. The more you scale and grow, the more space you take up in that industry, right? You start to kind of monopolize what it is. The more, I guess, the more niche you are, the more it allows other brands to come and become and be part of the industry as a whole, and to provide their own niche, their own perspective, their own special touch to what reuse and rework is. And I love that concept of this collective range of shops that focus on, you know, very particular types of designs, very particular, like something that they're really passionate about, and kind of continue to focus on there, because in the end, it will just be more of a slow scaling process, and no one's really kind of taking over anyone. It allows more people to do what they love. And I think, you know, we can't let greed get into the mix of things, because I think that's when you are taking out other businesses for just pure, again, greed and selfishness, when truly, I think us as a business, even at the size that we are now, like, we can survive, you know, and like, we find it like nice to that we're like slowly just getting, I guess, we like to take our time with each customer experience, I guess you would say, right? I think it is very special, and the quicker we move, the more harder it is to do that. And we had tried different ways to scale, working with a production company to produce more things. And we've learned that the current fashion production structure is not built for brands like us right now. And it's going to take time to continually work with them to change that. And so, again, that's just also something that we want to continually work on, to potentially scale in the sense that we want to make an impact for the better within the industry.
Yeah, I kind of see the sustainable fashion space ideally as being a bunch of small brands, because we've seen the impact of the broader fashion industry, all these conglomerates kind of taking over. And I don't, that's how we get billionaires at the top and garment makers barely earning, or largely not earning enough to live, well. So I think that I see that an ecosystem of many small businesses being the future of sustainable fashion. But it's difficult. As you said, there are things that come easier when you're a larger brand, and you have maybe more money for investments and
access. No, totally. I know. And that's where it's like, I think there's obviously we want to grow as a brand, right? But because there's no set pathway into doing that, and the pathways that we have seen to be successful aren't the pathway that we want to take. It's almost like you're just building your road block by block. And so, we see, okay, we have a range of different businesses, and it can be difficult, but maybe if we realize there's an issue when it comes to resourcing, how do you do more crowdsourced resourcing, right? So if someone had, if a fabric, the deadstock fabric shop or warehouse has a minimum, how do I work with another brand to meet that minimum, so that we can work towards that and still have access to the same resources? I think there's so many different ways to be doing that. And like, I wish that I could be like, I'm going to just like spearhead all these different things, but it's only just me. There's just two of us that really work on the consistency project full time. And I'm also a full-time mom. And so, it's like, it's so much to take on. At the same time, you just hope that through your presence within the industry, speaking out, connecting with other brands, that slowly things will evolve to where it needs to be, where we're supporting each other to move.
That's the thing with a lot of small businesses, you have to work together. And I've heard about like farmers doing sort of cooperative type things to purchase equipment or something like that. And So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's definitely the way that the small businesses are going to make it in this current system, current economy, is by working cooperatively. And yeah, I love that. So, what advice do you have
Yeah.
for other small businesses, maybe focused on upcycling or secondhand fashion?
Yeah. So kind of piggybacking off of what we are, like following up on what we were just talking about, like I think it's important to understand that, you know, when you have your niche, you can kind of be within this flow and community, right? And so I think if right now you're starting out, it's all about exploration and it's all about trying different things. You're like going to make mistakes. You're going to buy a batch of things that you're like, oh, I can rework this, and you do it, and it's like does not work, and you're like, okay, this is, you know, and it's just important to know that that is just part of the journey, and that is there's always something to learn from that. But really, your goal should just be really finding something that you just really connect with, because the more you and your team and the design process, like you're connecting with the products you're making or reselling, like the more the customer and the community really sees that. And so authenticity and, you know, kind of integrity in the quality of your work, that is something you should just be trying to instill from the very, very beginning. It's so easy nowadays with social media and all of this like stuff coming at us to compare yourself to other brands. And I'm sure even other rework brands are probably trying to compare themselves to what we do. And it's like, that can just be very toxic. And like I personally, when I started as a vintage shop, I felt like looking back on how I curated, I could tell there are certain phases where I was letting other shops that maybe were a little more successful or doing cool things influence how I curated my own shop. And that just helped me, that just got me off track, to be honest, you know. And again, it's part of the process, and going through that is still super valuable, but just remembering that like it's exploration, and once you find your niche, it's like focus on that. Like that's the next phase. And so that's where we're really at. It's just really focusing in, knowing what we love, knowing what we do best, and really like leaning into it and not being afraid to experiment within that niche that you have found for yourself. It's so easy to think, oh, well, like we primarily focus on pants. And so sometimes so easy to be like, oh my gosh, like that's such a cute dress. Maybe we should make something like that. And it's like, okay, slow down. Like developing, you know, a new pattern for a dress when that's really not our specialty at the moment is going to take time. And if we rush it, it's not going to be done right. And so take your time within each thing that you're working on, because it truly it makes a difference, I think. And trying to do too many things and rushing things, never rush a process. Anything that's rushed, it's, you know, I think you're compromising a lot. I think that there's that saying where there's like, it can either be cheap, good, or fast. Or wait, sorry, there's cheap, good, or fast. Cheap, good. Okay, yeah. So those are three different things. And you can only have two of those things at once, right? Like there's always one that you have to sacrifice. So it can be cheap and good, but it's not going to be fast. Or it can be cheap and fast, but it's not going to be good. Right. And so really understanding that dynamic imbalance of when you're making decisions. And for us, we always want things, we try to make things as accessible as possible. At the same time, you know, we can't do it as fast, like as quickly, maybe, and we can't get there as quickly.
Yeah.
So it's kind of
Yeah, that
a
makes sense. There's
balance.
a lot of additional considerations when you're trying to grow a sustainable and ethically minded business as well. And considering, yeah, the fair wages, as you were talking about before, and the responsible sourcing. Like, you don't just want to scale and make pieces that look reworked, but they're actually new. And there's all these various layers to consider. And it's okay to grow slow and take time and find
Yeah.
your own lane. I
Yes.
think that was such great advice. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, and if it means like having a second job, you know, to pay the bills and to to invest in your own business, that was the consistency project for the first 2 years. Like I had a freelance job that I was doing to fund what, and to pay for everything, because in the beginning you're not making very much money, if anything at all. You're just trying to pay the bills and get by. And so even I would say we're still kind of like at that stage. And to, experiment and grow takes money. And so, budgeting and being very, very conscious of that is also very important. And even if it means doing another job to make it happen, like that's part of the journey, and to embrace that.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing everything that you did in this conversation. There's so many great insights and takeaways, and I learned a lot about the deadstock process and the reworking process, and this was just really, really great. So thank you so much for coming on the show. I have one last
Well,
question
yeah,
for you that I ask everybody that comes on the show,
totally.
and that is, what does a better future for fashion look like to you?
Um, I I think it will encompass several things. It will encompass more reuse. I think obviously that's a given. More integration of how we reuse our products, but also the ownership of the excess waste that we do create, and really the transparency that we need to have there. And so it's like a combination of reusing things, but also sharing that process. And even when you reuse things, there's still going to be excess. So what are you doing to own your excess, right? Like, what are you doing to like properly recycle it? What are you doing to find other ways to use it? I think that is super important. And the other part is the accessibility and the inclusivity of like, I guess, fashion and rework and quality garments, right? We shouldn't have to sacrifice. There needs to be a reframing of how much things cost and how much stuff we need. We don't need as much stuff. And with that, we can put more value into buying, better, fewer things, I guess. I think there's always the side that you want to have a little bit more fun, and to obviously shop and have a wider array of closet. And thrifting, I think thrifting and just overall access to the secondhand clothing in an accessible way is also should be a huge part of kind of fashion industry. Fashion and secondhand should be basically one and the same, because I think thrifting provides the accessible price point for people, and still allows for the creativity to style and have fun with fashion. It should still be
I love
fun.
that. What a great way to end us out with that vision for a better future for fashion. I love that. Thank you again, Natasha, for coming onto the show. This has been a
Yeah.
lot of fun. And yeah.